Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Addict's Advocate. I'm your host, Dusty Dean, and it is my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Schwartz to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on your beautiful podcast.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. When we're in recovery, our Friday nights are a little different than they used to be. and so now we do this for fun. One of the things that's kind of ironic about recovery is just, the relationships, the get-togethers, everything's just so much richer now, right? Whereas before it just became a social gathering to drink or to use or whatever the case may be. And now it's just, what I when I get together with people, it's got a lot of depth to it. It's got a lot of meaning to it. And it's one of the joys of sobriety, to be honest with you. You and I have actually met through the power of the internet. And I know that you had at one point in your life were struggling with addiction and have made it out of it alive. Thank God for that. Many blessings for that. And with that, you've learned quite a bit. And in that education, I think the education is what helps us from relapsing. Straight up. I went through many periods of sobriety and it never stuck because I never got the education. I never understood what it was I was trying to really accomplish with my life, because quitting using is not the end of it. It's just the start of it. And recovery isn't something that you get to a finish line on. It's something that you have to be aware that this is kind of your bag, for life. And if you don't respect the disease, it will show you what it's capable of. And most people that are holding on for dear life in recovery have had witnessed those experiences, were partakers of them, and we're thankful that they made it out of it alive. And I know I've got a few crazy stories, but tonight is not about me, sir. It is about you. And welcome to the show. And without further ado, please, the floor is yours. Tell us what happened and how did you get out of it?
So, like most people that come into addiction treatment centers or just find themselves dependent on substances or alcohol or any behavioral addictions, there's been some form of childhood experiences, trauma. And for me, it was no different, right? I experienced a lot of childhood trauma. My father left our family when I was 4 years old, and my younger brother was 1, and my mom was forced at a very young age not only to just be a parent that she wasn't ready for, but to become a single parent of 2 boys. And she had to take 3 jobs, and I share this often, just to put food on the table and a roof over our head and clothing on us. And I know the amount of stress that she was under. I did not realize that, obviously, at 4 years old. And so I took the brunt of that stress. I have suppressed those childhood trauma experiences for 46 of my 55 years of life. I do not use my childhood trauma as an excuse. I don't believe in making excuses, but there is clinical research, clinical evidence that supports that one can take their childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, into adolescence and adulthood. It contributed to my maladaptive behaviors, my white collar crime, and then ultimately my addiction to gambling, which was my primary addiction, followed by cocaine and cannabis, and frankly, anything else with my degenerative mindset at that time. I was very impulsive. You could tell me to try this and I'll try it, and all of a sudden I'm addicted to it. That was sort of the way my brain was developed, if you will. And as a result of a lot of that trauma, I was able to hide it from everybody. I never talked about it. Like I said, I suppressed it. I ultimately was able to go work in the entertainment space for one of my cousins. It created a great opportunity for me to afford a lifestyle to raise my 3 sons and be married to my high school sweetheart and live fairly comfortable until I decided to make these poor choices. And so I think, on a podcast like yours, it's not important, unless you tell me otherwise, to embellish on, the trauma in the childhood, or even the career that I had managing and being fortunate enough to work with high net worth celebrities. In recovery, we learn to be humble. And I learned to be humble. And I did have a very big ego during that era of my career, call it the first half of my career, the first 10 years. But the final 10 years were filled with addiction, and they were filled with poor choices. They were filled with about 100 plus character defects that I had. So long story short, so we can get into the recovery component, on May 3rd, 2017, I was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison because I embezzled over $7 million from a handful of clients. Thankfully, those clients got paid back in full. The media never showed that or ran that story. They just ran the story of embezzling because it would not be a story to tell the truth that they were paid back. I say that, I also follow up by saying that that doesn't change that what I did wrong was right, because what I did wrong was wrong. And again, I own that. I take full personal accountability and responsibility for my poor choices. In fact, you said something earlier, this disease, right? And you probably can relate very well to this, as hopefully many of your listeners can, because this is one of the largest, in my opinion, the number one debated question in the recovery community. And that is addiction a disease, or is it a choice? And I believe it's a hybrid. Again, I'll just state some evidence-based literature that supports, multi-generational transmission. So my father, for example, had a gambling addiction, a cocaine addiction, made very poor choices. That was the disease component. It was passed down to me. Again, I don't use it as an excuse, but that's just a fact, right? Now, with that fact, ultimately there became a choice that I was able to make, right? I never made the choice. The first choice I could have made when I started embezzling money and becoming addicted to drugs and gambling was to ask for help. But I didn't know how to ask for help. And when I say I didn't know, I didn't have the courage to ask for help. Because when I was growing up, asking for help was seen as a weakness. I'm 55 years old. This is many decades ago. Today, I'm a big advocate for asking for help, to become vulnerable and to have the courage to ask for help. I wish, I wish I gave myself that advice multiple decades ago. I didn't, but that's okay, because I don't live in my past, but I don't forget my past. And, if you fast forward, after those 6 years in sentence in federal prison, I was able to come home and re-enter into society. It was certainly not as easy as I thought. I did enter into society with still a kind of a small ego. Certainly wasn't a healthy version of an ego. And I took a job at Dunkin' Donuts. I got fired after a few months because I wasn't mopping the floors and cleaning the countertops well. And then I realized I got this sudden message from my higher power at that time. And my higher power said, you know what? Your destiny, your journey is to truly be authentically of service to your brothers and sisters in this program. And I want you to go to addiction study school. I want you to get your CADAC to become a certified addiction drug counselor. I also want you to follow up and go to grad school to become a marriage and family therapist with an emphasis in addiction and trauma. And so today, I make very little money, but I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life because I'm surrounded every day with my brothers and sisters in the 2 treatment centers I work with and the meetings that I go to, the 12-step meetings. And that brings me the greatest joy to know that I can hopefully be changing people's lives positively by not just my academic side, but because of my life experiences. And my hope is that the clients come in to the treatment center. I work at Altus Rehab, which is a 6-bed luxury detox and residential in Encino. I'm a program director and a therapist. And my hope is when everyone walks through Altus Rehab's door, 1, they know their family, and 2, most importantly, we're not just going to work on the dependency to substances or alcohol or other addictions. We will, but what is at your core that contributed to you becoming addicted? Is it that trauma? And if so, that's what we're going to focus on early in treatment. I'm going to get you to become, I'm not going to get you, excuse me. I'm going to invite you to become vulnerable and know that if you leave here with resolved trauma or experiences, the likelihood of you maintaining a sustainable recovery is very probable. If you leave here with still unresolved trauma, the likelihood goes down significantly that you'll be able to maintain a strong recovery. And so for me, that's what I try to do every day, is to help my brothers and sisters. Um, I applaud them for having that courage to enter treatment, a courage in which I did not have, as I said earlier. But this is what my journey is about today. Simply just being proud to be in sobriety, being proud to be in recovery, no longer having to look over my shoulders, no longer having to manipulate people and be dishonest, and to have a moral compass that was compromised significantly. So for me today, it's about practicing the principles of the 12 steps. I don't preach the 12 steps, but that works the best for me, and I'm alive because of my higher power and the 12 steps.
Jonathan, wow. I appreciate what you're saying about, trauma and and not trying to make excuses out there, but it is good to explain, right? It's good to explain. You understand, what happened, why it catalyzed what it did. And I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier today about this, actually, is that, we do a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking in our life. Oh, and I'd sit there and I go, yeah, when I was 18 years old, if I would have thought differently and would have been smarter, well, you know what? Nobody is. So just get that through your head. And so, we have to have a little grace for ourselves, right? And a little patience and a little just, hey, you were working with what you had at the time. And you were also obviously, depending upon, again, parental background and upbringing and their awareness of what was going on in your life, or there's simply their ability to help you. And I mean, again, we are all busy in life, and understanding that now as a parent, it's like, yeah, I mean, we're always doing the best that we can. And I think that's important. And so it also helps us maybe forgive, I think forgiveness goes a long way in that. I agree with you that I do have trauma myself personally, and I had some major just heaving crying sessions in recovery because it needed to get done. And I recognized that I was dealing with unresolved trauma that I was going to constantly relapse, and I was never going to let this stick unless I truly dealt with it.
Yeah.
And people do need to understand that humility, authenticity, vulnerability is not weakness. It's not weakness. It doesn't make you a lesser than. And unfortunately, generationally, we do have motives that, kind of run through family veins in that regard, right? The archetypical male, male should act this way versus, female should be acting this way. And so we're victims a little bit to our environment. Until we're smart enough to recognize what's taking place, we just succumb to it because we're ignorant. We're ignorant in that. And it's interesting to me because, we talk about this notion of being rich, being poor, and what kind of happened with you was kind of that reality, and then into a purpose-filled life with what you're doing now. And I agree with you. It's very empty to go after trivial material things and to obtain successes in a corporate ladder when, it's unless you truly find a purpose within what you're doing. And there's some feel good about it. There's some morality behind it. There's these things that, at the end of the day, you end up being left wanting more. And so you either go down the path of, trying to obtain more or stepping over people, because we know that pyramid, that corporate ladder gets tighter and tighter. So you got to start being the ways that you need to be to achieve those things. And you may not end up liking yourself because of it. Right. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden it's like, wow, this actually fills my soul on a daily basis. It drives me. I don't have the need to be rich. I don't want to go through those things to obtain those things. And this is, one of the best quotes I ever heard in my life was, "You are most capable of serving the person you once were." And I was like, when I heard that, I said, oh, well, this is it, recovery. I mean, I'm literally was 5 months out of recovery, and I basically started this podcast because I'm like, the only way that I'm going to survive in this is by contributing, giving back, and recognizing that there's such a misconception about what this is. And if we can educate, and even those that are supporting someone in active addiction, how do you have those conversations? How do you help them feel better about themselves while they're in active addiction, to be willing to stop their active addiction by going into recovery. It's, and I do agree with you with the disease notion. Is, I believe it's kind of a hybrid answer. I do, because we inadvertently get ourselves into this, right? And then we have the opportunity to become aware of what's happening to us. And then we have to be conscious enough to make the decision to choose to not anymore. And those are all processes. And unfortunately, it's too late when you've become aware of it. And that becomes, ground zero. It's like, you got to get yourself in, because it's usually self-destruction takes place at that point, because you recognize that this relationship and this love affair that I had with these substances is done and over with, because it is killing me. And then at that point you go, okay, moving forward, now I get to choose to go and have that drink. I can go choose to do that thing that got me high before. And it's such an elusive disease. It's such a weird thing, because I'm still in a group every week that we just talk about the way that this thing does what it does. And the triggers for me have been really interesting, because again, people, places, things, I get it, right? But some things almost, they delay in how they trigger you. And they'll also be just truly just abstract things. And you have to really take your time to sit and think about what it was that catalyzed it. I think that 99% of addicts are very high functioning, high thinking, very intellectual people. I think that a lot of that is what drives, unfortunately, their addiction, because of just everything. Everything's just moving that much quicker. It's that much more real, and there's a desire for a break. There's a desire for escape, because you just want to slow things down. And then unfortunately, right, with the way that this disease progresses, because this is something that was truly fascinating to me, was that my first and second times in which I basically stopped for a period of like 6 years, I had each relapse was progressively worse. And the symptoms that I would display became excessively worse, like blacking out, tremors the next day. But one of the things that I did that you and I share something in is that I went to gamble. And I would the lights would turn off, and then I'd be like, oh, shoot, I'm missing $10,000. And, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, it'd be like, well, let's try that again. Yeah. Same result.
No, gambling is a very progressive addiction. And for me, it was about chasing. I did not like gambling, but the week, the 2 weeks that went by and I'm losing money, instead of taking it from my own account, which we had, my wife and I took it from client 1, then client 2, then client 3 for, this 5+ year, 6-year run. And literally gambling every day for 6 years with a bookie on sports, whether it was NFL, college football, NBA, college basketball, Major League Baseball. I was, I don't like using this word, but I use it because it's true. I was a degenerate gambler, chasing money, hoping that I could win back $7 million on a weekend. Well, clearly that did not happen. But you said so many really great things, and that that resonated with me just throughout the moments you just spoke. And one of them was forgiveness, right? Like, I think that's so critical. And I've forgiven my mom. She's now my rock today. I don't hold grudges. She's someone who I look up to today, being my authentic self, and realizing as a parent myself, I'm still trying to earn back the trust of 2 of my 3 beautiful sons. I was just in this past May, 9 years abstinent and sober, but I still have work to do, not just on myself, but on repairing relationships with my 2 older boys who I hurt so much, all 3 of my boys. And I forgive them by praying for them daily, that they're not coming back into my life on my will or my timeline. They're going to come back in my life when my higher power brings them back into my life, and I accept that. Do I miss them dearly? Absolutely. But again, those are the consequences of my poor choices. I was best friends with my three sons. I pray for the day where me and my three boys will have a family barbecue. And that will come. I don't sit in self-pity. I don't play the victim role because I have a higher power that I surrender to on a daily basis who I trust. And I certainly don't trust myself. And people say, well, what do you mean you don't trust yourself? You've got all this addiction studies and you're a therapist. Because the truth is, if I start to trust myself, then my old patterns and behaviors will surface, right? And so I force myself on almost a daily basis to just say, I don't trust myself. And that's just one of my many tools that I use to prevent a relapse and to maintain strong, sustainable recovery. So for forgiveness for me comes in the form of just understanding that the people that I would be forgiving did what they did or said what they said about me or judged me or whatever they did because of what I did. If I didn't do what I did, a lot of people still would have been back in my life. So I choose to use that as my perspective and vision and belief in why it's important for me to forgive. First of all, I don't want to hold anything else suppressed in terms of my emotions. Today, I can connect really well with my emotions. I cry a lot, and I think for me, it's beautiful. I want more men to cry. It's very cathartic. It means that you're now connecting with your true emotions. I don't have to hide my emotions today. And I surround myself with a quality inner circle of people. I don't believe in a quantity of people in my life anymore. I get to choose by setting healthy boundaries with the people who I allow in my inner circle because those people are healthy for me and mutually we respect one another. And there's so many great tools that I've used along the years to get to where I am, but I'm not complacent. I wake up every morning and I'm really grateful to my higher power, my God, that today I woke up sober. Because I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. I'm not guaranteed after this podcast that I'm going to stay sober. But at least I'm putting myself in a win position by not becoming complacent on one line item of my big macro personal recovery plan. And that's just the way I live my life. I love going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings. That's my home group. I'm very active in the Gamblers Anonymous community. We take clients to all types of meetings every night of the week, whether it's a 12-step meeting and it could be NA, CA, SLA, whatever. We want to take you and expose you to that. And if you don't believe or want to be part of a 12-step fellowship, there's others. You can go to Dharma Recovery or Smart Recovery. The idea behind it, as you know as well as I do, that a sense of community is so important. A fellowship where I can walk in a room and people understand the way my mind works, and I certainly can understand the way my brothers and sisters' minds work. And that sense of community didn't exist for me in childhood, right? I didn't have a mentor in my life growing up until a day in which I met my rabbi, and he became my mentor. And today I have really solid people within that circle, and that really truly helps me. And just like you said, just authentically being of service, being vulnerable. I'm authentic today, but still with my authenticity, with my honesty, with all the antithesis of my defects of character, that contrary action that I've taken. I still have to be in a place where, frankly, I have more work to do. I have more work to do. This is a program of progress, not perfection. And I'm far from perfect. And I accept that. And frankly, I'm okay with that because I measure myself on a daily basis. If I present myself with pro-recovery behavior on a daily basis, okay, that pro-recovery behavior is taking the next right action, right? So for example, if I'm at I'm at a Starbucks. I tend to use this because I have two addictions today. I would just say one really, and that's caffeine. And when I walk into Starbucks, the old Jonathan in an active addiction saw a couple of people in front of him. He would be like, hurry up there. Like, I got to get my coffee. Like, who are you taking your sweet time? Big ego at that time, right? Today, I practice patience because I'm no greater than the persons in front of me. And frankly, I get to make a choice. Do I want to stay here and be patient? Or if I have to be somewhere, then get out of Starbucks, Jonathan, get in your car and make sure you're at your meeting on time, and you'll get coffee later in the day. So there's that ability to be aware that in active addiction, I would have had a temper tantrum perhaps or been disrespectful. And knowing that in recovery, I'm nothing but grateful and respectful. And I get to make healthy choices that are congruent with pro recovery behavior. And that's how I measure myself on a daily basis, because throughout the day, I at least identify in real time 3 or 4 things I do today that make me proud of who I've become and who I'm becoming because my behaviors align with pro recovery behavior. And a lot of people, we talk about sober. I believe that there's 2 words that people use when they're in recovery. One is sober and the other is abstinent. To me, there's a big difference, especially for people early in recovery. Abstinence means you're free from chemicals, free from alcohol or substances. But that doesn't necessarily mean, in my eyes, that you're sober. Why? Because sober is a lifestyle. You could be abstinent from your drug of choice, but is your behavior, like I just described for mine, congruent with pro-recovery behavior? If it is, then you're sober and abstinent. If it's not, you're lucky you're still abstinent. You better get into this lifestyle and immerse yourself in it. Because if you're not behaving by doing the next right action, then the likelihood of your past patterns and behaviors will quickly take over. And guess what? You'll no longer be abstinent. You will relapse.
Well said. We went around the whole horn there, and the notes I have. One of the things that you started off with, just saying, the thing that we don't recognize in addiction is that we are irrational. We are not thinking clearly. And so when we've cut the cord and the clarity of thought is there again, the magnitude of everything changes, right? It truly does change. And that's definitely something to be said about getting the monkey off your back in that regard. Not to say that the physical withdrawals of addiction are what they are, and that's a whole nother beast, right? But if you're in active therapy, actively working with mental health professionals as needed and everything, you've set yourself up coming out of the gate in a very, very positive way. But we are obviously responsible for the part of the things that we did in our active addiction, right? And that's one of the things of the growth of sobriety. We recognize that, right? We are very easy at living a life, number one, where it's everybody else's fault, and shame on you for not seeing it my way, and I'm not going to budge. And so it becomes basically a law of wills, and that does nothing for us in progress in society, and also just being truthful to each other in our communication. But and when we're hiding those emotions, right, in our active addiction, right, the only way that those emotions now come out is by anger, agitation, short of fuse, and so there's just so many intrinsic things that happen with people that they can't even get themselves to at least experience, because people are afraid of sobriety. They are afraid of it, and they think that it's a death sentence. You don't want me to drink the rest of my life? Are you kidding me? Well, hold on a second here. Let's just start for a week. Let's see what that feels like. But again, also, right, recovery is personal. But you also get to the point of understanding, how your mind works. And once you get to the point of recognizing that you're in active addiction, your ego gets killed immediately, I think. I mean, that's the only way that you can truly get into a recovery phase, because you in a sense, you recognize your bag, right? It's almost, I can almost understand the fear and yet the ease in which somebody gets diagnosed with something, that again, there's no difference there, right? It's okay, now I have to manage this in my life, but at least I know what it is. At least I know this thing that has been kind of elusive to me, because again, addiction usually has its roots younger in life, and yet it really doesn't show itself until time goes on, that we are growing as in our intellect through that process.
Yeah.
I love the sober versus abstinent reality. I agree with you. You cannot be a dry drunk. I mean, you can't just simply divert all that energy, that addiction energy into something else, because all you're doing is becoming addicted to something else. And that's one of the big problems we have as society, right? With this whole dopamine dump that we're doing to ourselves constantly. We're doing it on our phones. We're doing it on, we're constantly chasing it. And we've lost the ability to be patient, to sit back, to be less sensory. And that's scary. So what do we do? It becomes obviously just simply a recognition, right? It becomes a starting that you have something that you are preoccupying in your life, and you have to look at your relationships in your life to really understand, what is taking place, and maybe even be humble enough to sit there and say, hey, how do you think I'm doing? That keeps things humble. It keeps you curious, right? And it keeps you open to growth. And we don't get education on our lives that are taught to us in recovery before the need for the conversation of addiction or recovery even comes up. What we learn is just great life stuff, and there's a lot of psychology in it. The ability to know yourself in this life, I think, is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves, and to question why we do what we do, to recognize our motivations, to all those things. And I think that in recovery, you level up. There's no way around it. If you're doing it right, you're leveling up, because you're becoming hyper aware of who you are. You're becoming aware of your flaws. And again, it's not to sit there and go, shame on you, because you have these flaws. It's just a simple say, hey, this is something that's a part of who you are, and that's okay. But it's okay to work on that too, right? We in the younger generations, right? I mean, at least I know in my generation, one of the ways that I felt like I was being raised was that there was this need for conformance, right? There was this need for this conformance. There was this lack of individuality, and I think a lot of it is peer pressure associated. A lot of that is the intellect of your parents and their willingness to not live vicariously through you, in being raised. And that's all, again, it's tough, man. It's tough, yeah. Right? I mean, yeah. What do you do?
It's true. You mentioned a few things I would like to touch upon, if that's okay. You used, like, the way I heard what you shared moments ago was like, this is a life program, right? And I believe that all people, or most people, should be part of a 12-step program, meaning do the 12 steps, right? Because it truly shapes us to be better human beings. For example, just take step one, just admitting that you're powerlessness and unmanageable over X. I struggled with that step because I was still in ego. I went to my sponsor and I said, I don't understand what you mean. You gave me step one instructions, and you're telling me that I have to accept that I'm powerlessness and unmanageable over my life. I will never forget this. His exact words were, schmuck, you're facing 23 years in federal prison. You don't think your life's unmanageable and your powerlessness over it? And at that moment, I said, you're right. We better get started on these 12 steps. So that's step one, right? Now let's go to fast forward to step 4. Okay, many of us carry resentments throughout a period of our life. Let's identify those resentments. Let's identify what areas of those resentments have been impacted negatively, and let's rid ourselves of those resentments. Now let's go to, call it, making amends, step 8, step 9, or more importantly than making amends, let's go to step 10. Let's take a daily inventory of ourselves and reflect daily on our behaviors. And because for me, through my strong self-awareness, like I said, I had about 100 defects of character, many, and they still may rise to the surface on a day in and day basis. It's possible. But when they do today, because I do step 10 on a daily basis where I reflect on my day, in real time, I can recognize, wait a second here, procrastination is surfacing. Dishonesty is surfacing. I'm making this up, but this is real life stuff, right? And so if it is, I can course correct my inner dialogue and stop in real time and align my defects of characters by recognizing that they're surfacing and have them go away. It may even be just asking my higher power to please rid me of this procrastination or rid me of this anxiousness in this moment, this catastrophizing. Whatever it is that might surface, I do ask my higher power. So these steps, whether I had a substance use issue or addiction issue, had I known them and if more people knew about the benefit of them, we would have people, call it the normies, if you will, becoming better human normies. And unfortunately, it seems that it's limited to the addiction community, and I'm grateful that it is part of the addiction community today, and I wish it would expand to others. But, you also mentioned ego a few times, and for me, as you probably know, the acronym is EDGE God Out. If my ego surfaces, that means I'm edging God out, who happens to be my higher power. So for me, I believe that humility comes first, as well as my isms, well above any barometer of a slight healthy version of ego today. Because humility, I'm grateful that today I've learned humility. I'm grateful that I present myself and to others with authentic humility today, because people deserve to have someone communicate with them without manipulation, not feeling that they're greater than, but they're on equal playing field. And that's how I communicate with clients. That's how I communicate with anybody that I come across walking the streets, opening the door for people, being polite for people. That's humility. Not humility also for me is not having the money I once had. And knowing that when I go back to Starbucks, for example, can I afford a $6 venti soy latte today? And if I can't, that's okay. That's okay. Because I have my own coffee at home. And frankly, $6 for me is a lot today. And that's okay. And so these are things that are very important for me. And, I communicate this often with people. And I'm glad that you brought up both the ego and the importance of the 12 steps.
What's nice about it, right, is that everything just becomes less busy, right? I mean, you talked about, your troubles with the law, and I can only imagine, right? I mean, being a criminal is hard work. It's hard work. I mean, nothing in life is free, right? and so when we can get the voice to stop. I shared a story about one of the people that are in our group that had, they wanted to test the waters. They wanted to sit there and go, no, I can be that Friday and Saturday night, one beverage person with my girlfriends. That's the person that I'm going to be. And she played the game. And the thing that you can't undo your growth and recovery, right? Even if you relapse, the education is there, and it's going to sit there and constantly bark at you if you do fall into relapse. She was absolutely amazed at her own brain. And this woman was a clinical psychologist. She was amazed at what addiction does to her. And that's the thing that I feel so much more peace in my life. It's slow is good. Slow is good. But let's talk about that, because there is a process in which we need to do to get there. One of the things that I know specifically that was very important for me in recovery was setting up boundaries, healthy boundaries. Because in addiction, I was very much trying to be all things to all people all the time. And when that happens, you can be nothing to nobody. Or at the very least, you're not going to be anything for yourself other than an even bigger addict, because you're basically just trying to catch your 3 to 5 minutes of breaks in life. And nonetheless, but boundaries is important, right? Healthy levels of boundaries and recognizing that you do have worth, even in your addiction, when you were isolating and things were falling apart and you were destroying yourself and felt like, all the guilt and shame that comes with it, you are still a worthy person that is deserving of respect by people. And you are allowed to put up those things that keep you healthy inside. Put up those things that help you maintain your dignity, your self-dignity. And if it means that you have to be no longer tolerant of some things, that's what you do. Trying to, again, because we know that we're responsible for our part in everything in our lives, right? What is the responsibility? How do we go about, communicating that? How do we go about, establishing those things with maintaining the dignity of the other people too involved? So.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's a big part of a client's treatment plan is to learn assertive communication skills. And assertive communication skills are simply learning how to communicate in a healthy way and how to establish healthy boundaries with people who are not supportive of your journey or don't understand it and can be toxic. And so it's really important for people in early recovery to learn that we are no longer people pleasers. We still may be insecure in early recovery, but let's build that self-worth, as you said earlier, that self-esteem, and, in the big book, they talk about self-centeredness. And what I talk about when creating boundaries is having a healthy version of being selfish, because we get to put ourselves and our recovery as the number one priority in our life. Because if we can do that, all the other areas of our life it'll have a ripple positive effect on those areas. So, simple example of how to create boundaries. I actually had a client learn this today. Let's say a friend was talking to an alcoholic and saying, "Hey, like, you want to go to a restaurant today, or let's go to a winery today. Let's call this friend Betty Smith." So I role played with this client how to set a boundary with Betty Smith, and it starts something like this. It's, first of all, it has to be clear and succinct. In active addiction, we tend to over explain because we want to be liked so much. In recovery, hopefully we learn to love ourselves, and we're not seeking external validation from others, but rather intrinsically or internally through ourselves, right? And so the way to do that is with Betty Smith is say, "Betty, thank you for inviting me to a winery. I am not ready to go to a winery. I'm early in recovery. So please don't ask me anymore or invite me to go to a winery with you." Period. That took less than 10 seconds. Now, how Betty Smith reacts is out of my control. Betty Smith can choose to respect that boundary and not invite me to go to a winery. Great. If Betty Smith can accept this boundary, then she's welcome in my inner circle. But if Betty Smith is not willing to accept that, that's okay too, because that just shows me I've just eliminated one more unhealthy person for my recovery. And that's why setting boundaries are done in a very clear and succinct way with no expectations on how the recipient is going to receive it or how they're going to either accept it or reject it. All I can do is, like the serenity prayer, control myself, right? And so for me, assertive communication is simply setting a clear and succinct boundary. Of course, it includes active listening skills. There's other factors that go into the assertive communication equation. But let's start with simple things like creating a boundary. Because, as I said earlier, most of us didn't do that in active addiction. It's time to do that now.
Well said. I think that you're hitting a topic that was actually one of two questions that when I sent over the show primer for you, it was this was one of two topics that was really poignant to me right now, because I find that, number one, relationships in recovery can definitely have a whole dynamic with them that whereas even the ones that you thought would maybe fall away, in sobriety, they do. But, and you hope that the ones that were strong and, or at least, empathetic in your plight and were supportive as best as they could be in your recovery, those continue to grow in recovery, right? But when you have relationships that you feel that should maintain their strength post and they don't, you sit there and you scratch your head, because in recovery, you unlock and Pandora box some things potentially that were there, that were outside of the addiction itself, but were maybe helping control or at least push the addiction a certain way, or at least making it more susceptible to addiction. For example, codependency, maybe other mental health issues underlying, especially with maybe your partner whom you love, maybe again, experiences with family growing up, Maybe you were dealing with covert narcissism, we're unaware of that. All these things, right? Especially as you become more aware of yourself and you become aware of just the education in recovery and the terminology, because you do touch all these things. All of a sudden you're like, uh-oh, I may have other things now I got to work on. Or I recognize that we have to, maybe I've got a relationship that we need to go to the therapy now because there's some things that unfortunately, and now, so all of a sudden you've inadvertently forced the potential for growth from somebody else in your life, in your own recovery, because they now have to become aware, or they maybe become aware in just the fact that this relationship has been unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And part of that was my addiction, and the way that manipulation maybe takes place. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, because I've been blindsided by a couple relationships lately, and I really don't know how to navigate them. So I seek a lot of counsel on them right now. I try to make sure that I am clear in my emotions, because they are close relationships to me. And so I also try to maintain, constantly reflect on my responsibility again in this relationship, and also the things that maybe have created the increasing turmoil in the relationship. But also trying to make sure that I keep the magnitude of that problem, if you will, in my life in check, because I don't need it spilling over into other things in my life. I'm developing a balance in my life, and that balance is important in my survival, in my self-care, in all those things. And so I have to, and I'm not going to say compartmentalize, but I have to constantly maintain a peace with where the situation is in the life, and not try to force it to something that I can't force it to.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, with relationships, I view them in so many ways. I mean, first thing for me in recovery is recognizing how my behaviors and choices negatively impacted my loved ones, my 3 beautiful sons, as I mentioned earlier, my ex-wife now, my mother, my stepfather, my brother, the people in the entertainment community, my direct victims and my indirect victims, the people in the community that my kids were raised in. I hurt countless people. So for me, it starts with me recognizing, because of my choices, the countless people that I hurt. Now, how I get to choose who to make amends to and who to earn that trust back from. And the other thing that is important for me to recognize is there's no way that I'm going to earn back the trust of people, my loved ones and others that I really want to, through the words of my mouth. Because this mouth is known to them as someone who is a manipulator, who's dishonest, and I'm not going to believe anything out of his mouth. And I accept that. And so the way for me today to earn back healthy relationships is by doing that next right action we talked about earlier. Having my behavior. If someone really wants to get to know the real Jonathan Schwartz, the one who's today honest, practices that rigorous honesty, the one who today has a moral compass that's not compromised, value system, humility, many of the traits that we learn in recovery, then just observe me. Observe my actions. And if you do, I think I can earn back your trust that way. Because, and so for today, I talked about this earlier, I surround myself with people who have given me a chance and not judged me for my past. And even if they did judge me in the past, they've seen this new version, a better version of Jonathan, and they're willing to accept that person today. And those are people I want in my inner circle. I'm very fortunate to be with a woman today in my life, my girlfriend, who our relationship is so authentic. It's so transparent. It's about healthy communication. Like you said earlier, like if I'm feeling down or she's feeling down, I know she's going to be there, even just if I want her to listen. And sometimes if I want her opinion, which I do often, I'll ask her. And the same she does with me. And I respect her and she respects me. And, I never really had a healthy relationship, even with my ex-wife. And mainly because it was mostly my fault. Because I was not emotionally present, certainly during the active addiction years. I was physically present, But today I've learned the importance of emotionally present trumping or superseding being physically present, because I thought I was a great dad coaching my kids' youth sports teams, but I was in the dugout looking at my phone and the scores that I was betting on. I was not emotionally present. So I really wasn't a great dad. Perhaps I was a good dad at best. But, being emotionally present today for my girlfriend, for the people in my inner circle, for my younger son, eventually, God willing, for my two older boys, for my friends, for my mother, that's a big deal. And that's what recovery affords me, the ability to earn those relationships back and to be grateful that I'm emotionally present with each one of those that are in my inner circle today. Because I certainly ruptured my family dynamics. And, again, as I said, I don't live in that part of my life anymore, but I certainly don't forget it.
No, definitely it keeps you humble. I do have some patient people in my life as well that I am forever grateful for, because I wouldn't have put up with the shit that I did. But this whole notion of reconciliation, I think, is important. And I think, again, there's also liberation in confessing what you did wrong, confessing the way that you were. I mean, even if it's minuscule or it's grandiose, or there's just things heavy on your heart that were, things of shame, that there's so much healing in communicating it out. And because you can let it go, right? We can let it go and we can move forward. I really enjoy this notion of the next right action, because you know what, that's the best we can do. It kind of goes along the lines of one day at a time. Let's not overwhelm ourselves with, in a year and a half, somebody's getting married. I'm not going to be able to drink that day. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. That right there tells me that you should not have another drink.
That's right.
If you've long-term planned out your alcohol consumption, that's a bad thing. Oh. But the emotionally present, yeah, I am thankful in recovery for just the new awareness. Just simply, I mean, again, I think that there's a lot of people that live life that don't suffer from addiction in the traditional sense, but are not truly present in their lives. And recovery gives us that opportunity to be like really in the here and now. And that's a blessing. And we know that every moment moving forward is going to be the richest that we're going to make it. And we're going to experience it in all of its glory. And that's one of the things that in addiction, we get really afraid about dealing with some things. And ultimately we just don't want to deal with anything anymore. And there's fruit in our life in experiencing and not running away from it. You have a system down in Encino that you're a part of. That's a recovery program, correct?
Yes.
Tell me more about it.
So we have two homes. They're each 6 minutes apart, driving distance wise. I'm grateful to work for a beautiful employer. Her name is Janelle. She's the owner of Altus Rehab, Altus Rehab. Each of the homes have 6 bedrooms. Each home is a luxury, detox, and residential. We have an incredible team, an incredible staff. As I said earlier, I'm a program director and a therapist there. It literally is not a job for me. Like when I go there every morning and open the door and see clients, how can I help you? Do you need any help? Do you want some support? Do you want to sit and talk? Let's get that 4th, 5th cup of coffee for me and sit in my office and let's chat. And Altus Rehab really has proven results. Like we're having this huge barbecue on Sunday for all the alumni that have come through our doors and left and still maintaining a strong recovery. To see this on Sunday, I cannot wait for Sunday. I cannot wait to hug the brothers and sisters that have been through our program and the way that they've been able to transform. And listen, I don't want to say that I take the credit, because I don't, and nor does any of our team members. The credit belongs to the individual who's willing to put in the work. We're just helping them, give them the tools. They're the ones utilizing the tools. So I'm really proud to work for, like I said, for Janelle. She didn't have to hire me a couple years ago with my background. In fact, most people wouldn't take a chance on me and hire me with my background. She gave me an opportunity to have a job, and so that I could put food in my refrigerator. I could buy some clothing, maybe from time to time buy that Starbucks soy latte. And she didn't judge me. She thought, and thankfully she was correct, that my experience combined with my education is a benefit to our clients. And I'm grateful and I'm indebted, and I don't take that for granted because most people did not give me a chance at employment because I'm a felon. And so I don't judge people today. Um, I get to know people today in prison. I learned that even gang members, former gang members, when you really take time to get to know many of them, they have feelings too. They just grew up in a world where selling drugs was their only means to put, food on the table for their families. And so when I can take the time to listen and get to know someone and to feel that they have a beautiful soul and a heart and life circumstances or environment maybe shape them at that time, if they're willing to put in the work, I'm here to help you. And that's what we believe at Altus Rehab, and I certainly subscribe to. All people have to do now is ask for help. Please ask for help because you are worthy of it. You may not feel it in this moment. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're here for you. I'm proud to say I work at Altus Rehab. I also work at teletherapy and lead a group with the Chabad Treatment Center in LA. It's a Medi-Cal facility. That's where I got my start as an intern. I'm grateful for my clinical executive director, Dr. Donna Miller. She's taught me so much, and that's such a beautiful program as well. So I work for two really incredible programs, and that I'm so grateful for. Thank you for letting me share that.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm a big advocate for, if somebody's local, right? They hear the opportunity that you guys are offering, and the work, and yeah, whatever we can do to get the word out that, hey, there's a lot of people out there that care and have empathy and want to see you get better because they know what it's all about on the other side. They know what it's all about. And that's a beautiful thing. I appreciate, at the end of the day, when I went into rehab, it was the funniest thing. So it was about a week into it, and I said, I see what you guys did to me here. I'm like, I was under the impression I get 30 days, I just get to go on with my life. But no, apparently I got to do some sort of an aftercare program and things like that. And I got to start going to something on a regular basis. I'm like, okay. Now I see why you don't tell people that on the front end, because you probably wouldn't get people in the door if they realized that. But at the end of the day, well, of course, that's the reality. There is no trophy. You're not getting a certificate. This is the thing that you get awarded with in all this is life.
Yes.
And that should be enough. And yeah, but you got to stay on course. I saw, some of the stats from just a traditional sense of 30 days and what the relapse factor is. And it's almost like, what's even the point? Why am I even going to care? Why am I even going to put myself through 30 days? And yeah, you have to make the commitment, and you never want to see somebody get to the rock bottom that has, scars that are, either they cannot be undone, or the lasting damage of them is substantial. That that wound constantly reminds you of things that you used to do.
Yeah.
And those are the unfortunate, tragic realities of what this disease can do.
Just to add to what you said, it was just so important. Like, yeah, these like Altus Rehab, they're, private facilities. Most of them are 30 days. We're lucky if we can get insurance to authorize it for 45 days. And we've been fortunate enough to do that. But the truth is 30, 45 days, we're just helping you build a solid foundation. Now let's start. And when they first get there at Altus, we start talking to them about an aftercare plan. The gold standard, as most people know, is to go to sober living that has a PHP or an IOP component. Stay there for as long as you can. Yes, the groups might seem redundant, but you're going to have therapy and learn to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. And now you're building a solid program on top of an already solid foundation. That gives you a wonderful chance to have that freedom that sobriety affords. So please, for those listeners out there, there's great referrals we can give you if you don't already have them out there for sober livings in the Los Angeles area, frankly, any area, Orange County, LA County, with a wonderful IOP or PHP. Go do the work, continue to do the work, because Some people will say, "Nah, I'm just going to go home and get back to work." Really? You've just built only a foundation. Okay, well, I'll go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Great, then do that. At the very least, do 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor, build a sober peer network, work the steps, be of service. Okay, I'll call that a compromise.
Find your tribe. It's so important. I know that has been just so saving, and it no longer becomes the education that I get from them. It just purely becomes I get it, or they will bring something up that you sit there and go, I do that too, or I've had that feeling too. And it's just, finding the people that understand what this is all about is, I think I really do believe, right? I mean, I know for me personally, right? When I was in my addiction, I didn't think anybody ever felt like the way that I felt. Even not when I was high in my addiction, it was those brief windows in between, right? I never felt that people understood me. And the reality of it was that I was just purely conceding. My last time was really like, wow, I've gone through 2 periods where I was sober for 5 years, 6 years. And I got to this place where I'm like, I'm cured, I can control it. And then within the year, I've ended up down the rabbit hole. And I go, but it was a concession. It was a concession just going, and it was a cry to God. And I'm like, please put somebody in my life that's going to help me out of this, because I can no longer control what I'm doing. I think that I can, and within a couple of days, I'm right back at it. So I ended up, what ended up happening to me is that I came home from a weekend away, and I overindulged that night. And the next day, it kind of hit me really hard, and I knew that I was constantly going back to it because I was feeling hangover effects that were new, and I recognized that the using and the effects were different as well. But at that moment where I basically just started confessing to anybody who would listen to me, talk to my mom, I talked to my wife, and all these things, it was like, hey, let's go to the doctor. Let's go to the doctor. Let's get in front of the doctor. Let's talk about what's going on. And so I did that. And I was like, I started setting up for like maybe a psychiatric, consultation as well as a psychological consultation, right? And I immediately just jumped off the deep end at that moment, because now I basically conceded and I admitted defeat, if you will. But I now put myself in a gap to when I was actually going to physically start getting help, true help. And that's very, very, very dangerous. When people are at that moment when they know that they've got it, they need help, you cannot wait one stinking second. You can't, because that's, I think at that point you're basically saying goodbye. And so I literally went on repeated benders, put myself in ER one night, just again conceding, asking, begging for help. Got home, and it ultimately ended up being I was coming home from gambling one night, and it was just like, and I at that point I didn't care how much I drank, and I just didn't drink enough, and it was, nothing mattered to me anymore. And that's the other thing, is that because I suffer from bipolar, so I play the manic and the depressive game, and the manic always was an easier thing for me to manage, at least so I thought, but it was the depression that really got the best of me. And so, when you couple all those things into it, it's a recipe for disaster. And I recognize that, even through the times of trying to understand what those things were for me in a mental health perspective, I never gave myself the chance. And that's the thing, is that's the problem with rehab, at least from a person who is in addiction that's willing to get some help. They go, I can give you this much time in my life, but that's about it. It's like, whoa, well, the only way this is going to happen is that you give us the rest of your life. We're going to start intensively, and then we're going to spread it out throughout the rest of the time. But, I need the rest of your life for this to work. I don't need 30 days. 30 days is just, it's the fast track method, to start your pathway.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's really courageous on your part, right? Because you're role modeling that most people, like Altus Rehab is a dual diagnosis, primary substance use and then mental health. And, one thing that's, the addiction community as well as the mental health community is so misunderstood. And many people that come into treatment centers struggling with some form of mental health diagnoses. But what I encourage them to do is don't identify with your mental health diagnosis. Like, in other words, I'll use depression. People walking in saying, I am depression. No, you're not depression. You're struggling with symptoms of depression. And the more that you can change that internal dialogue with yourself through positive self-talk, then you begin to distance yourself from that mental health diagnoses and more willing to learn coping skills to manage that diagnosis. And so that's why coming to, we have a dual diagnosis house because we want to work on the mental health. We want to work on the trauma, PTSD, because again, to leave here with confidence, one must work on their mental health as well as their trauma. Their confidence level will go up. They'll walk around, as I like to call it, for fun, a swag, and they'll feel very worthy of re-entering society, hopefully following that strong aftercare plan we talked about. And then they will no longer identify with their diagnoses. In fact, many of them have reported that they're no longer taking medication for it. And medication's okay to take. It may very well be that coping skill. But there are other alternatives through incorporating and implementing a lot of these coping strategies to manage XYZ mental health. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, and I applaud you for that.
Oh, thank you, sir. This whole inner dialogue conversation, I think, is very important as well. We do have to reprogram our conversations that we have. We're coming from something that has a really great way of making us feel like the devil just wants to beat us down, and we're trying to get out of it, but we also feel like we're not worthy to get out of it, and we've self-inflicted this injury, so we just get to suffer with it. Well, you know what? We've got a better way. And so I agree with you. I like to tell people as well, a diabetic doesn't say I am diabetes. They say they have it. Right. I am not addiction. I have a addiction disorder that I have to manage.
Yes.
And what you see is the symptoms when it flares up. And so there are two phases of symptoms in my disorder. The one is when I don't do anything about it, and the other one is when I do something about it. And when I say don't do something about it, that means that managing the not succumbing to my addiction, and then what happens when I do succumb to my addiction. But I do appreciate that. I think we're getting to a point here where this conversation, I think one of the things you touched on earlier, which I use on a daily basis as much as I can. And I try to be distinct in the things that I talk about on a daily basis. And those are the things I'm grateful for in my life. Because gratitude washes away so much. It washes so many needs, wants, don't haves. And it again, I think helps with that shifting of that talk, that inner dialogue. Because in recovery, hey, we're still here. We know of those that aren't. I unfortunately lost a wonderful therapist that was in my 30-day. That was, I think it was within a year. I had no idea. I mean, of course, obviously a lot of people that are therapists and things like that were in active addiction at one point, maybe in their lives. And I know had at one point was struggling with something, but yeah, so that was just it. And that's the sad reality about it, because one of the things that for me, I never want to see is that if we lose someone to addiction, that the family is still painted a good picture about who they were, and that the addiction wasn't who they were, because we haven't breached that threshold in society that truly understands what this is about. Because I think that we would be more receptive to it and how we care for it.
Sure.
So, Jonathan, this has been great. I think I'm at a point where I feel like this has been beneficial. I think this has been enough. And if you have anything else that you want to talk about, I am open to whatever. You tell me, bud.
No, I mean, I would just ask people if they do want help, they could reach me on my Instagram, professional Instagram,
Oh,
at the real Jonathan Schwartz. That's Jonathan Schwartz, Schwartz. So at the real Jonathan Schwartz, and you could DM me whatever the technology is words that they use today. I'm too old to understand technology, but definitely send me a direct message, and I will reply. And good, bad, or indifferent. I know some people might judge me out there, and I'm okay with that. You're welcome to ask me anything you want, even if you don't like the words that come out of my mouth today. And but if you do need help, I'd be happy to do my best to help you, whether that's encouraging you to come into our treatment or referring you to another treatment center or just giving you advice that you might be seeking. And so thank you for letting me say that because that's important. I mean, it's really just about helping people at the real Jonathan Schwartz. And eventually I'll have a book out. I hope your listeners will want to read that book, and a movie will follow, and there'll be a strong part of that movie will be about recovery.
wonderful, Jonathan. Yes, I will be. The the viewers and the listeners will be having all that information outlined either on the video itself for their information and their ability to access you, as well as we'll have it in the description below too. But yes, I appreciate this. I want to get people that are struggling in front of those that can help them end the struggle.
Yes.
Jonathan, I appreciate the evening. You take care and God bless her.
God bless. Thank you for having me.